Cinema is a company with a passion for cinema and a thorough understanding of film, audio, video, and computer technology. They are proud distributors of popular movies like Bahubali 2, Nekoda Parvai, and many more. So without any further delay, let's hear it from the expert. Over to you.
Thanks, sir.
So good morning. Thank you, Suresh, for having us here. I heard great things about CTOtalk. I can see it's pretty popular. And thank you for all the wonderful organizing that you guys have done so far. So you said 15 years, it's actually 20 years. So, but this entire presentation is about me, so you know all that very well very enough. So there's not a whole lot to take away from the slides themselves, so it's all me talking, so I can figure out how much time I need to spend on some of these topics. So any
As title suggests, so and I am looking for the technologist tag.
okay,
So more into
the technology.
yes.
So not about this.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, technology point noted. Yes.
How exactly the company is going to keep up with changing, with improving technology? Like, because there's so many people who want to try and get movies leaked online. So how exactly you guys keep up with that?
Super. Good question.
Yeah, so I was talking about the challenges we have in the top series. How do you quickly realize and then adapt it?
Super. Anything else?
How are you evolving? A lot of things have changed in 20 years.
Yes.
So how are you evolving and keeping up to date?
Okay.
I would like to know how technology has revolutionized movie making to the masses, right? Usually people with big budgets used to make movies, but now anybody with the camera and the video can make like 15-minute short movies kind of thing.
Okay.
How technology is helping them to do it.
Okay.
Streaming services are kind of taking over, so I'm just
Are
wondering what.
Okay.
So I'm just wondering how exactly you guys are going to adapt to that.
Okay. There's black and there's white. And you still can make out what that picture is, right? It's a picture of an owl. So it's fairly clear, no ambiguity what the picture is. So to digitally represent an image like this, right? You only need 1 bit per pixel. Okay, so they say that is clear to everyone what I'm talking about. I'm just trying to get an understanding of you all have your heads clear on how images are represented digitally. Right? So something like this, because it's only 2 colors. A pixel is either black or white, you only need 1 bit to represent that. Okay, so if there are 200 pixels in this image, you need exactly 200 bits to carry that information. So this is what's called a grayscale image. So we went from every pixel either being black or white and just needing 1 bit to be represented, to every pixel having about 256 values. So how many bits do we need to represent each pixel? Anybody? 8, right? So those 8 bits can hold 256 values, right? So, but what's interesting is even though this is a gray scale image, right? There's a lot of detail that you're already seeing in this image. Because when I move to the color image, the color got added, that's about it. But looking at the previous image, you could still tell it was a angry, very feathery, blush owl, right? That perception didn't change. I'm really struggling with this. Okay, so this image, because it's now representing color, every pixel can take one of 16 million values. And now we have gone to what's called true color mode, where the red, green, and the blue each get 8 bits each. It's 24 bits per pixel. That gives you every pixel could take 1 in 16 million values, right? But just one thing to still again notice is that most of the detail didn't need color, right? So if you looked at this owl in the night, this is what you would see, right? Night vision, you don't perceive color. This is what you would see, and most of the details are there, visible there. So just keep that in mind. So that was just a way for us to get our head on how images or pictures are represented, right? Now thinking about audio. So you would have seen an audio waveform like this, right? Audio is a mechanical wave. We perceive sound because the vibrations move our eardrums and a whole bunch of systems inside our head, and then our brain processes that, and that's how we hear something, right? So obviously, a way to see audio is by looking at a waveform. So, but if you zoom in really further into it, right? I've used a tool called Audacity. So, amateur, free tool. You can look at it there. So you can really zoom in, and you start noticing how we see a very zoomed in view of the wave, but you also see these. It's not a smooth line anymore, right? You see kind of straight lines with those dots over there, and so what you're basically seeing now is what's called the samples of the audio, and they're called samples because the digital representation of that sound was created by measuring the extent or the amplitude of the wave at those instants. Okay? So again, when audio is digitally represented, it's some analog audio, starts off analog, and then there is a sampling process that happens, and a sampling process is basically measuring what the amplitude of the sound wave is at any instant of time. Obviously, you can tell that the more often you measure it, the better your curve is going to be, right? Because I could measure it here and there, and then you just draw like you lost all of this information, right? So the higher you sample, the more you're going to, the better detail you're going to have. There's also a physics reason behind it. There's something called the Nyquist theorem, which basically says that you have to measure sound, or measure any signal for that matter, at least 2 times the frequency of the signal itself that you're actually measuring, right? So most of you might have heard that we hear sound in the frequency range of about 20 hertz to 20,000 hertz, right? So that automatically means that you have to measure at least 40,000 times or more per second. So now all of you would have seen terms like 44.1 kilohertz. Like CDs are 44.1 kilohertz, and suddenly some movie or music will say they are at 96 kilohertz and 48 kilohertz. This is what they're talking about. So that's one aspect of the digital representation of sound. The other aspect is, when we're saying that we're measuring a value, right? You could again start with the 1-bit example I was giving, 0 or 1, right? And if you just used a 1-bit, you're basically going to reproduce what's called a square wave. It's either high or it's low, and that's what you measure. Any intelligible audio is not going to be captured as that. So usually you allocate more than 1 bit, much more than 1 bit for this, so we'll get to that. So this was just a deep dive for us to understand what digital representation of picture and sound means. And this is very fundamental to what we do. We are in the business of getting these bits, picture and sound bits, in the form that the creator intended, with absolutely no modification or degradation. So this is very core to our business. Okay, and this is also very core to what we are going to be talking about today, because moving this around is what we do. Okay, so if you I'll pause this one time for questions for this. Just if all of you are clear about how images and sound is represented digitally, then we can move on. Or if you have any questions just about this matter, I can address it. Because I've definitely simplified a few things, but looks like everybody got it. So that's kind of the deep dive I wanted to do. So we'll go to a completely different angle now. So which is the business of cinema, which is not very well understood. People say, oh, Vijay's last movie made 300 crores. So the producer got all 300 crores, or Vijay got all 300 crores. Something like that, right? That's kind of what the media makes you believe when they say numbers like that. So we wanted to basically break this up into what goes into making a movie and what the revenue streams are. Right? So, are you familiar with these kind of a diagram? What is the name for these kind of diagrams?
Sankey. Sankey.
What's that?
Sankey diagram.
Sankey.
Sankey.
Sankey. Is it okay? Because I truly didn't know. Okay. So we start with the expenses, right? So where the money goes. Okay. So the cast and crew budget is actually split into these three sections. Is that clear? So that's the cast and crew, right? And that's split into these three. Something odd here? Anything odd here? Okay. See, this is a typical Indian movie. This is not. I mean, I think the model overall works in other film industries. Maybe the height of the scripts are going to vary between the film industries. And then there are other aspects like pre-production.
There's also another crew section on it, stars and other actors.
Yes.
Is cast and crew?
Yeah, because cast is stars, other actors, and crew. So this is a combination of all these scripts. So that's how this diagram works. Right? All this is feeding into that, and all these are feeding into the cost of making the movie. So pre-production, this would usually be when the scripting happens, and writing happens, and casting happens, all of that. Of course, the most in most film industries, this is the most expensive part of actually making the movie, the production. So you can see that that's big, and then post-production is like editing, color, VFX, all of that falls, visual effects, all of that falls in the production, post-production cost, finance cost for cost of money, marketing, of course, and digital prints. This is in one area where we are a beneficiary of that. That's little strand of hair. And movie profits. So what's movie profits?
Movies do make some profit.
Okay. No, I was wondering how it came there. That's to balance it out. Okay. All right. So then the revenues come from, of course, an Indian movie. Of course, the major shares will come from a domestic theatre, right? A theatrical, which is in theaters in India playing the movie. International theatrical actually has been growing, and it's already a substantial portion, as you can see. And there are other mediums like your TV channels and online platforms and all of those. Remake rights, dubbing rights. Side income is coming from box office, popcorns, and the other interesting piece is advertising. Okay, theaters advertise within the screen, and some also go outside in their lobby. All of that goes there. So this is should give you an idea of where the money, how the money flows in the cinema business, right? Actually, the movie business really. When we say cinema, we are talking about theaters, but this covers the other mediums also. So some additional things I want to clarify is that when a theater plays a movie, right? And they sell a ticket. They actually share. They do a revenue share of the ticket, the gross that they collected on the ticket with the distributor. Okay? So theaters we're very familiar with, but there's also this business called distributors. You probably heard of distributors. There are distributors in every business, right? And the reason we have distributors for toothpaste and movies and cars and everything is because distributors are the ones that have local knowledge. Right? A Chennai distributor knows how to market his movie, his or her movie in Chennai, and it will work, and has the theater relationships and all of that. So that's a distributor, right? And that's the distributors are one of our key client base, because they are the one that are actually sometimes involved in marketing, but doing the digital prints and getting the prints out of the theater. Okay, and the revenue share is also again varies from country to country. It really depends on a supply and demand. So if it's a big movie, the exhibitor probably gets a very small share in the initial weeks, but then the share keeps increasing for the exhibitor as the weeks go on. Because they still get people to come and buy popcorn and parking, and their other revenue sources are still getting filled with people that come. Okay? There is another term that some of you may or may not have heard. It's called virtual print fee or VPF, which so the Qube origin story. I found a lot of people were interested about that. So 34 years ago, young Senthil with a head full of hair came out of college and I think did computer science and engineering, and Senthil's dad was working on a movie. He got to work on the soundtrack and goes through the process and finds that it's all too primitive, too manual, and clearly you couldn't get. I mean, this is talking 1986. Many of you might not have been watching movies at that time because you were too young or not born. But the quality was bad. I think you could tell that even from me as a layperson at that time, like it's around early 90s that we actually saw a dramatic increase in music and movie soundtrack quality happen. Like people started talking about it and even pay attention to it. So this is around that time. So so there's unhappiness with the process that was there, but there was also the opportunity, and there was a financing scheme available at that time for young graduates that came out, and Senthil got that, and he set up a studio called Media Artists, with which really had equipment like film projectors talking to mix consoles and using time code, and just changed the paradigm of how movie soundtracks were made in India. So Media Artist went on to being a cream of the cream in terms of audio production in India. So I've heard names like all the way from Ilayaraja to A.R. Rahman to George Harrison from Beatles I've recorded there. Coincidentally, at the same time, Jayendra, who's from Madras at the time, was working in Bombay as a creative writer for advertising. Felt his calling was making films, and again there was an opportunity there, which is that ad films were primarily coming out of Bombay at that time. The brands were there, and the creators were there, and Bombay was where people went for good ad films. So there was an opportunity to change that. Editing used to happen at that time. So films were literally cut with scissors and spliced. And if you are doing a work on video, you used much like how we would copy videotapes at home, right? VCR to VCR. So tape to tape, editing and all of that. You can't even imagine how all of that happens today, right? In terms of large product lines, there were a few ideas, and I happened to meet them at that time. Reach out to Senthil, actually sent an email and said, I know I can't be in front of the camera, can I be behind the camera? And he said, yeah, we're looking to make some products. And so we started our product development group 20 years ago in 2000. One of our first products was a product called QGem. Anybody that's not from Qube, have you ever heard of this product called QGem? Anybody use QGem? Oh, not from Qube. So QGem used to be a jukebox that would go into a coffee shop, and so it had a touch screen, so you pick music and it will play music in the coffee shop, right? That was the simple part of it, what we saw in the front, but it was our first foray into digital media distribution actually, because the value proposition that we gave to our customers was that they don't have to worry about music or curation or any such thing in their facility. We put the jukebox in, we'll do what Google is doing today. We'll basically look at what kind of music is getting played in that particular location and give them more of that kind of music. Right? If they played more of Tamil melody or let's say jazz or whatever it is, they'll get a lot of that kind of music. So that was the idea was that, and there was also an advertising bit that was built into it. So between a number of songs, an ad would play. So that's how this all got started 34 years ago, with 20 years in making our own products. And we can get this to yes. So along the way, the company got some venture funding and some big names like Nomura and Cisco. I'll explain to you why we did all that. And in terms of our footprint, we have 7 offices across India. Lastly, because we need to have an office in every film industry in India, so we have to take care of Hindi, Telugu, Malayalam, and some offices internationally also. We do our development again primarily in Chennai. The bulk of the team is in Chennai. We do have our hardware developers in Berlin, and we also have a development center in Ukraine. So somebody was talking about how did we have challenges finding talent. As you can tell, we did. Because nobody believes that when we say that a company in Chennai had to go to Ukraine to get developers. But we had to do that because it is challenging to get developers in Chennai. So we are 1,000 people now. So there is about 4 different soundtracks that you can see here. DTS alone is unique there that they didn't put their digital audio on the film. Okay, so the DTS had a time code that was on the film, and the audio went in a CD. And so the film projector would read this time code, send it to the DTS player that would play the audio in sync. And it's not easy at all because the film projector is a mechanical piece of equipment. It doesn't run exactly at 24 frames per second or anything like that, right? It's going to have its beads and flutters and all that. So we actually, one of the first things that we did when we started product development was we implemented a software player for DTS, for the DTS playback. But what's actually interesting there is multiple things. There is a lot of benefits that come the moment you don't marry the sound with the picture. Right? So look at these other formats. The other formats will put their actual audio there. So if it was a Hindi movie that you're watching, that's Hindi digital versions of the Hindi audio. Actually, there's also an analog one, but the audio is married to the film. So maybe we can take a minute to think about what was the benefit of the DTS approach, where you only had time code. Yes. So you that is a benefit of, this is like early componentization that we had in the industry, right? So you can have the same print for Tamil and Telugu and other languages, but you just had to send them a different scene. It's called a chromaticity diagram actually, and let me try and like relate it to concepts that you already know. Okay. So again, I would think that most of us have made color decisions in our technology line of work. So this would be like deciding the color of some user interface element in HTML or whatever it is that you build your user interfaces in. Right. So how do we represent color in code today? RGB, we spoke about all that. Hexadecimal, yeah. So you would basically have a mix of some mixture of R, G, and B, which we spoke about already, right? Okay, so spark the thought in my mind. Have you ever like taken an awesome picture where you look like dashing on the phone or on the computer, and then you printed it, and it looks like right? It looks like shit, right? Most of the time. So let's think like phones and printers and all these are devices that make color, right? In their own ways. But anything that makes color will have its own characteristics or limitations. Okay? So that's one thing to remember about, that every medium has its own characteristics and limitations, even between phones, like a phone from Apple versus a phone from another company is going to have different capabilities in terms of how they can produce color and what they can produce color. So the point really is color is very device dependent. Okay? And I don't know if it was for this reason, because this happened about 90 years ago, actually 100 years ago, in 1920, people that were concerned about how humans perceive color, and if you're saying something is green and he's saying something is green, it could be completely different green, right? Because this floor is green here, his shirt is green, but they're not the same green, right? So what does it mean to say something is green or red or whatever, right? For a day-to-day, general purpose, it's okay. But when you start like picking out clothes for you or your car color and all that, you expect more precision in what you're talking about, and not just precision. How do we like put some numbers, quantify color, and it means the same to almost all human beings. 100 years ago, people figured out a way to come up with numbers that would mean some absolute device-independent color. Okay? So this chart is basically showing you there's a lot of calculus that has actually gone behind building this. But from a user perspective, you basically look at the X and the Y, and you see how they are going from 0 to 1 almost on both axes. But what's interesting here is that this horseshoe-looking thing is basically showing you all colors that humans can perceive. Okay, and then if you look at this triangle in there, this is the color space that we use for cinema, and what that means is that anything that you see in a cinema, any color that you see in a cinema, will actually fit within this triangle. Okay, so what that means is that there is a whole bunch of other colors that you won't get to watch in a cinema. Why is that? Because even to produce this range of colors, right? And it comes down to how blue the blue is, how red the red is, how green the green is. it is a lot of physics and science and engineering that went into it to build that. And then there are, it's a function of design, energy, cost, right? You could make a $10 million projector that could do better color than this, but nobody's going to buy it, right? So it's a cost-benefit balance, and this is, I mean, it's expensive, but this is the color space that we use for cinema.
What you're really saying is, when you capture a photograph or a picture, it captures all those colors, but you're only eliminating the rest of the stuff and only retaining the one that humans need to pursue for optimization or something like that.
Okay, so yes, that is the scenario, but even cameras don't capture all of that. Because cameras also they do the reverse of making colors, right? They're capturing colors, so they have a sensor, and those sensors have limitations. Again, you have inexpensive sensors, you have expensive ones, and the whole range of that. So devices don't go close to capturing all of that. So that's why every color sensing device and every color making device, they all have their limitations.
Well, I mean, come back in the lens, which is an analog thing, right? A lens is
Like our eye
yeah.
I don't know if all of us will perceive all of these colors. I think all of us,
have 95.
yes, and some level of color blindness and all that, right? So if you look at like when you talk about colors again back in HTML, for example, HTML5, if you will go read the HTML5 specification, we actually have mentioned a color space called sRGB, and you might have heard that name casually thrown around, right? So when you look at sRGB, the color space is basically telling you what is that triangle for sRGB. Obviously, it's a smaller triangle than what cinema projectors are. Okay, so that's the concept of color space. This is the color space that we use in cinema. It's called the P3 color space, and this representation of X and Y get turned into the cap XYZ that I've written there. Again, there's some math behind it, but it's not important. So instead of capturing and instead of recording and transmitting RGB values, in the cinema business we actually do XYZ. Again, for the reasons that we then have a device-independent way of representing the movies, right? Because the idea behind the design was that that you didn't limit in one sense, but also you had the right color reproduction in a newer piece of equipment that would come that would have a better or different color performance, because it's absolute colors that we record and transmit. Device independent color representation is what we do, and it's 12 bits per channel. Okay, so that's an important number. So remember when we looked at the owl with the color, right? The owl with the color, I mentioned it was 8 bits per channel. So 8 times 3 was 24, and 2 power 24 was 16 million colors that you could do, right? I think this one is 12 bits per channel, so 12 times 3 is 36, and 2 to the power of 36, I think it's like 64 billion or some ridiculous number. And there'll be a whole bunch of colors that are going to be outside of this triangle. So if you look at how the cinema industry standardized on these parameters, it was again a combination of science and empirical measurement. Having people known as golden eyes in the industry, because obviously people have different levels of visual and oral acuity. So people that are called golden eyes, they sit them and they show them image that is 16 bits per channel. And then they show them it's 14 bits per channel, then they show them 12 bits per channel, and they all indicate if they see any difference. At the point they stop seeing differences, they stopped at that. Right? So we went for the highest quality in cinema, where anything more than this would be visually indistinguishable. No, because every bit that you add to a channel is actually adding system cost all the way. It's going to add cost to storage, it's going to add cost to transport. So this process, right, of making the pictures meet a certain standard or fit within a certain standard and record them using a certain format is what we call mastering. Not just what we call mastering. Generally, mastering in media basically means you're taking the media and targeting it for a certain environment. Okay, so back or even now, when people do audio recording, right, for the cassette, they have to do a mastering pass, and then for CDs they have to do another, because cassettes and CDs again have very different capabilities. Okay, so that process, the process of making a media fit a certain distribution medium is called mastering. Okay, so that's so what we basically looked at is the picture mastering side of things. At this kind of data that we capture for an image, and we work with 2K and 4K pixels, 2K and 4K images, it will be a lot of data for a movie. Okay? A movie, I think at the 2K resolution at this quality will be about 2.5 terabytes. Which, by the way, in 2005 was still a big number. I mean, today maybe 2.5 terabytes doesn't seem all that lot, but still, if you think about transmitting 2.5 terabytes to 1,000 theaters, that's a lot of data already, right? So obviously, you don't send data as it is, you compress it. Right? So in picture we use compression, and we actually use a compression that will sound familiar, but it's not at all what we're familiar with. Normally, when you see like a image problem, like when you see what are the different kinds of digital problems that you would see in an image, like when your movie is buffering, for example. Right? People say it's buffering because either it's stuck or you also see it very pixelated. Exactly. So that's the term that people use. Although it's a characteristic of a very popular compression method used called that's based on something called macro blocking. So basically, you take the image and you divide it into 8 by 8 pixels or 16 by 16 pixels, and then those are treated as objects, and then you look for redundancy between them and do prediction between them and such. So that's how compression always worked. JPEG 2000 does not do it that way. It uses a method called wavelet transformation, so where it basically decomposes the image into different resolution levels. So you would never see, you should not see blocking or pixelation, blocking basically when you go watch a movie in the theater. So that was one of the reasons. Then the other thing is JPEG 2000 is also what's called a scalable codec, which means that you can send a movie in the 4K resolution, and if the theater cannot do 4K, it can extract what's called a 2K layer from JPEG 2000. Usually, if a device cannot do 2K, what it will do is it will take the 4K, expand the 4K, and then shrink it back down to 2K. But there's a lot. JPEG 2000 is a very, very computationally intensive compression algorithm. Okay. And the other reason was also that it didn't have it was not encumbered by any licensing. So if you use H.264 or MPEG-2, if you've heard of names like that, those are not free. Yeah, those if as a company or as a business, if you're using them, you have to pay a license. So this one was free of that also. So the idea is basically we start with the the mastering at the highest quality, and then compress using a very high quality compression algorithm. Okay. And for sound, remember I was talking about sample rate, which is how often you measure sound. That is you can do it at 48,000 times a second or 96,000 times a second, and it's 24 bits per sample. So that's the range of values that it can measure. Okay. Remember, if it's 1 bit, it can only measure 0 or 1. 24 bits, it can measure a large number. I forgot what it was. But at 16 bits, it can measure anywhere from 0 to 64,000. But we use 24 bits per sample, and there can be up to 16 channels of sound. And channels is something that you might be very familiar with. they are basically referring to, I mean, simplistically speaking, it's referring to a speaker. Okay. So when you say I have a home theater in my home, and you say I have a 5.1 system, you have how many speakers? 6 speakers. Yeah. Or 6 devices. Yes. 5 speakers and then subwoofer, right? So movies, the movie soundtracks can go up to 16 channels, and I've just shown you like one of the popular configurations. This is called 7.1. So basically, the L stands for left. So this is the speaker that you see on the left of the screen, right, center. This is the low frequency FX. That's again simplistically that's a subwoofer, and then left surround, right surround. Rear left surround and rear right surround. So these are the 8 speakers in the 7.1. Sorry, but I picked this configuration for something very interesting. One of the greatest benefits of digital cinema has also been accessibility. And what that means is like making the movies enjoyable for people that couldn't enjoy movies because they had a hearing problem or a visual problem. Okay? So there's a whole bunch of accessibility enablement that's happened with digital cinema. Some of it is also because of some governments being very, very particular about enforcing that and making movies available to everyone. So you see these 2 channels of sound, HI, stands for hearing impaired. And what hearing impaired is basically, usually it's they take the movie sound and remove all the effects, and so for people that are hard of hearing, they just want to hear the dialogues because that's where the movie's story is, right? So they get their own soundtrack that they can listen to in their. They go to the theater, they get like their own headphones, and they listen to a slightly different soundtrack than what the others would be listening to, and this one would have good, intelligible dialogue quality, and all the other effects and like bomb blasts and all of that will be turned on. Yeah.
Most movie theaters have this?
In Chennai, do we none, right?
And is it a function of movie making or is it's just distribution?
It's a function of distribution. That's a good point. Because you finish your movie, you mix your final audio, and then you create a hearing impaired track version from that. What was the Psycho visually impaired stuff?
Yeah, that was released with.
VI.
They had a special show because the theaters don't get devices.
Needed. So
Quite a few movies have been doing that.
special show, right? Yeah. So there's the Ability Foundation that does that. So what happens? So people go there and everybody just gets a
Decent movie.
Psycho. Yeah. I saw some.
Yeah, no, everybody hears the narration from the screen.
No, from the main stage speakers itself. Okay.
How does the HI work?
HI would usually work where they get like some. What I've seen is they get like some wireless equipment like this, and the HI track is beamed to that, and they wear their headphones in the seat. So the guy next to him would be listening to the regular one, and this person would be listening to the HI track, and they get the dialogues will be really loud and clear.
Just to add, the Disability Act 2016 makes it compulsory for all. The Disability Act 2016 makes it compulsory for all theaters and movies to contain this act. Just that the government hasn't yet notified the rules, but definitely within the next year or so, this will become common in every theater. It will be compulsory.
I just asked, since you're digitally distributing these channels, in a country like India, where for 3 or 4 cities and villages, do you have still the analog version?
No. In fact, the tier 4 and the smaller cities were one of the early beneficiaries of going digital, right? Because one is they had rickety old systems, and the other is they would not get a big star release movie because with the print, the economics were different. Right? Prints were very expensive to make. So like a big star movie would be Like a Rajnikant movie would be how many theaters previously in film?
Maybe 150 in Tamil Nadu.
Right. And now it is
600.
so now they make, because the additional print, the incremental cost is very low. So they actually are the early, they benefited from this a lot more than it's obvious, yeah. Okay, one thing that's happening, so I spoke about sound and I kind of simplified it. It's that, we looked at the channels and channels correspond to a speaker, but what's also happening now, what's moved on in sound is immersive audio. And immersive audio is one popular brand that does immersive audio is Dolby Atmos. So if there are several theaters in Chennai that actually have Dolby Atmos. It's truly a much better oral experience if you go and listen to immersive sound, because what they've done is, sound is largely one-dimensional, so they were in like one axis, there was mostly horizontal sound, but now they've added a height dimension to it, right? So one is that, so you'll actually, so if you can actually go to theaters and just look up, and if you see like arrays of speakers on the ceiling, then you're most likely in an immersive audio setup. The movie might not be, right? So you should also check that. But there are several theaters that actually have this already in Chennai. So that's immersive audio, right? So there's the height layer that was added. But there's something called object-based audio that actually should give like the techies a good feeling. So the idea behind object-based audio is that when you're looking at the sound mix for a movie, previously people just worked in terms of channels, right? The sound is going to go to this channel, this other sound is going to go to this channel, or some proportion, right? If you put equal proportion on left and right, you hear the sound in the middle, right? If you want to locate the sound to the left, you change your proportion. So that's how sound has been working for a long time. With object, it's certainly a far more refined model where you can now have a little bird in the scene get its own, it'll be its own audio object. A gunshot could be its own object, a star can be their own object. So instead of just flattening out the sound into speakers, you keep them as objects, okay? And you distribute these audio objects to the theater, and there is a renderer in the theater that will look at the objects, number one, and also looks at the speaker configuration in the theater, because theaters don't have to have the same number of speakers. For example, a larger room will have a lot more speakers because of the surface area that they have to cover. A smaller room will have a smaller number of speakers. And the renderer at that point decides the right placement of sound in the channels. And I was thinking about what a good analogy would be for us is just-in-time compilation, right? So when Java came, that was the big thing, right? Just-in-time compilation. So that the benefit of just-in-time compilation, as opposed to the C++ type compilation, where you kind of compile for a Intel architecture. That's all you did. But every Intel processor has its own additional capabilities, right? Yes, opcodes and SIMD extensions, and they can do something faster than the other. So the just-in-time compiler can actually look at the processor and compile it then and there, right? So the object code that he gets will be different from the object code that you will get. So the object method of rendering is similar to that. There is just-in-time rendering of the audio that happens in the feed, but it's actually a little bit more sophisticated than that, because this hasn't really happened for pictures. Today, pictures are like what I showed you. It's all just a group of pixels, right? I didn't know that the owl's eye is there or the owl's beak is here and such. They just get, every pixel is the same, right? There's no objectification that is happening there. But this, I think this trend is actually because if you look at what computer vision and or largely what computer vision tries to do without AI is trying to discern objects and images, because most of the images and videos out there did not have that information, right? But when you start, but now when you create new content and you're actually going to describe all of them with objects, then there's fantastic applications that are possible, not just in the movie entertainment. So being able to describe media not just as rasterized, just a bunch of pixels or a bunch of samples, instead as objects, has a lot of benefits. Because there will be a day when all you need to send to a theater will be the script. I was expecting more of a feedback. Imagine if you could just send a script to a theater, right?
So will there be templates? Will there be templates for?
There could be templates, but I'm talking about, I don't know when this is going to happen. This is a pipe dream, but I'm saying that that's the direction these things can go, right? You send a script to a theater. Satyam Theatre in Chennai will render that movie with a South Indian looking, Vijay looking star actor and whatever. But if it went to Bombay, it will be Akshay Kumar doing all of the same things, right? So that's kind of the extent that we can look at. So if I think somebody was asking about what keeps us thinking about what's coming up, what's getting exciting, is like we still think we are in very early days of all this stuff. We're doing pretty mundane representation of stuff. I think the intelligence stuff is just beginning to happen. Okay, but don't quote me on that. This might never happen. Okay, script rendering in the thing, but maybe one of you should do a startup on that.
It can happen. It can very likely possible, because right now they are shooting a multi-language movie. If you really look at it, they're shooting in different instances.
At the same time.
Yeah, at the same time. I think they very much are possible.
Right. There have been quite a few advancements that we have seen in that space, where people do motion capture of actors and then apply the emotions on some other actors. So,
do you mean deep fakes, where they change the person's face to someone else?
Deepfakes are definitely in that realm, right? Where yeah, but I'm maybe talking about more professional productions where they actually do motion capture with one person, and they can render it onto, like, you could be the actor, but your emotions were played by somebody else. But yeah, I think deepfakes is probably in that. There's some similarity. Okay. Back to reality. So the last thing that I wanted to cover, so we covered picture and sound. There is also subtitles that go with movies, but they're not that complicated to understand, right? Picture and sound has all of these nuances. Subtitles, as you can tell, this particular line is going to come in at that particular time in the movie. Only flavors, or rather some extra stuff that you're seeing is that there is very fine control of the typography, and in cases where typography cannot cut it, you can actually embed images, sub pictures and not text for subtitles. So finally, so we looked at picture, we looked at sound, we looked at subtitles, and all of this go into a file format called MXF, Material Exchange Format. Of course, has a lot of good stuff. I already noticed people are telling me to move on. So I'll very quickly say this is a container file format. This is where we put our picture separately, then sound, subtitles, and these are the files that gets distributed to the theater. Okay. So what we've gone so far is really the process of mastering and what is getting delivered to the theater. Okay. So there is some additional metadata in addition to just the audio, video, and subtitles that goes to the theater. there is something called a packing list. So basically, I told you, right, a set of files are produced with your picture, sound, and subtitles, and how these files are arranged and sent out as one package is through this process, through this format called a packing list. Okay, so a packing list is basically referring to all the sound and all the pictures in the movie, and then it's an XML file going along with those MXF files of audio, sound, and audio, picture, and subtitles. So that's what a packing list file looks like. Again, very quickly, it's basically telling you what the hash is. That's kind of the most important thing, so that we can always check the integrity of a distribution package of movie that we receive at the theater, because they all have these SHA-1 hashes. I suppose most of you are familiar with the SHA-1, the cryptographic hash. The more interesting piece is this actually, although the diagram looks pretty plain, this is the one that actually directs what part of the movie gets played in the theater. Okay, and it's called a composition playlist, and it refers to, it's split up into reels, every reel having picture, sound, and maybe subtitles. And all of those tracks, as they're referred to, are backed by files. So this is just an XML file, right? So one quick benefit is that if there is a censor cut that happened, let's say after the movie went, actually a lot of movies that don't do well will go and trim their timing down because they think that will save the movie. And that happens quite often. And what they do is they actually go edit this file, recut it. So to send a new cut of a movie to a theater, you can email this file, and they can play it. Because this is part of the componentization that I was talking about. We don't marry picture, sound, and subtitle together, number one, and we don't impose any order of playback in how they are arranged in the file. Well, they are definitely played in sequence, they are formed in the file, but we don't say this is where, if the file starts with a picture, we don't start from there. This guy, composition playlist, will actually tell us where it starts. So it actually has something called an entry point into each file, and that's where we can, so you can imagine how it actually allows us to cut between these media files. Okay, I can take a break for questions. If anybody has anything, just to.
Those immersive object audios are created from movie making, or is it actually again created from distribution end?
No, it's not done. It's not done. In theory, you don't have to do anything different while the movie is being made. It's when the sound mix for the movie happens. That's when it happens.
Okay.
All right, Sunu?
So how is the mastering process happening? Where is it going?
Super. So what happens is like when a movie is complete, right? Typically when a movie is complete, they would come to us, to any one of our mastering facilities. So this is, I'm talking about our service side, okay? I'll be touching into a product soon. Our services are run by a product. Since you asked this question, and I think it's a welcome break for us to take, is that when a movie is done in any of the film industries in India, they'll come with their final picture and sound to us. And the final picture and sound is not in this format that I spoke to you about. It was usually, it's usually a lot very dependent on the workflow they went through, what camera they used, what digital intermediate process that they went through. So there is some of you might not know that the color or the look of a movie is not finalized on the set anymore. I think it was never, there was always a bit of work that used to happen in the post-production, but now there's extensive stuff that happens. Like what's green can be completely turned into blue because they feel that works for the mood of the movie, right? But it's not just wacky changes like that, but it's sometimes you're shooting a song over 5 days, and the sky is not going to look the same. The song, generally we don't think they run, they sing for 5 days, right? So you wouldn't make it seem like it was happening over 5 minutes or whatever. So then you go and match the sky. So there are things like that happens in this process for the digital intermediate. So those things determine the formats of the files that we get. And our system and our workflow is pretty flexible that we can take anything and convert it into this digital cinema format. It's actually called a DCP, a digital cinema package. So we can turn that into a DCP. So that's what happens in mastering. And we master about 2,000 movies a year. So about 40 movies a week across all our locations. But still, it's a lot of stuff actually, because you have to master them. And I was telling you that the JPEG 2000 encoding is a big hog. It's not all that fast. It's all gotten much faster now, but there are all kinds of other things that we have to take care of. Everything has to be QC'd. So there are.
The infrastructure required to master will be like 5 PDX NVIDIA graphics card system. What would be the infrastructure that
You can, I mean, to do it practically at the kind of industrial strength level that we're doing here, you need to have very beefy workstations. We have, tens of those, but you can do it on a laptop. It'll just be very slow. You don't need any. I mean, because all of the digital cinema stuff is pretty open standard, but of course, you have to use the right tools that support the right workflow. Just because the spec is out there, we've seen all kinds of bad stuff that people would do because they haven't understood some of these things. So that's what happens in mastering, and then so we would make the digital cinema package, and then so we've gone through a mastering process, right? So what happens is that the cinematographer has not yet seen what it is that will be shown at the theater. It's only when they come and look at the digital cinema package, because we would have mastered it to exploit the strengths of the digital cinema projectors that are out there. And so they'll come in and they'll actually see it and say, okay, looks good, you can ship it, or they might say, no, change this or that. But this is a very ideal workflow that I told you about. Our film industry is so last minute that we don't get the full movie at a time. We actually get reels at a time. And then we would have finished the reel, and they would come back and say, no, we had some visual effects problem in that reel, so we have some more new effects here. So there's a lot of flexibility that is needed in this process. So that format that we saw, the composition failures, this is very, very useful, because you might have baked in like a 20-minute picture file, right, with some pictures, and then they later find that they have to change 20 seconds, right? So we can now just do the new 20 seconds, cut out of this into the 20-second part and cut back into it, because of those these entry point controls that we have in those. Yes.
Is mastering and the so-called old term film editing the same?
No, film
job the same.
No. Film editing is actually a thoroughly creative process where
it also makes the sound and audio.
No, I mean film editing and the picture editing per se is about how they sequence the scenes, how long you're holding on a shot, and all of those things that they do for the effect that they're trying to create. So that's the editing. Mastering is basically taking the edited final product and making it look right for theatrical or for Netflix and such. Okay, any other questions about mastering? Yes?
Not mastering. Like I have heard of this digital restoration of old movies. Like how effective it is. Like are we doing the same process that we are following here?
No, I mean these the digital cinema process, at least what I've described so far, is agnostic, meaning that it's not concerned with how the movie came into being. So the movie could have been shot on film or digital, or it could have been a restoration. So where they actually take the film and they go through a pretty laborious process of actually restoring the picture using computers and human beings, and then we'll basically get that what's called a digital source master. Okay, so we get a digital source master from a restored project, or we'll get it from an active project. It's all the same for us.
So the process you described is standard across the globe, or is
it is
composition file who maintains who updates it?
That's a great question. I actually put up that film print to talk about that, right? Because see, when film exhibition or film movie business has been, it's at least 100 years old. And what that meant is that in 2005, when we were all beginning to jump into digital, we had a huge responsibility, which is that today, or at that time, you could make a movie in India, put it on 35mm film, and send it to Nairobi, or you can send it to Sydney. You can send it to anywhere in the world. You didn't have to do anything different about it. You know that that film will go and work on whatever crap projector or good projector that they had, old projector that they had. There was extreme standardization in that industry. And you didn't have to worry about it. There might be some edge cases here and there with some other exotic formats that came, but generally that was not there. So it was a business that had huge standardization. And so everything that I spoke to you about are derived from a specification called the DCI specification. And so DCI is the Digital Cinema Initiatives. It was a consortium that was formed by the major studios like Disney, Warner Brothers, Paramount, Universal. You might have heard of these names. They got into that because they could see that what we are very good with computers is breaking things, right? Like a new version of the operating system comes, it doesn't support 64-bit. Now we have to go get your new version of an application. The developer is moved on. I mean, for us it's like part of life, but for the film business it was not. They would buy a film projector. I don't know how much a film projector would cost, but they would keep it going for 25 years. It would just run. They didn't have to do anything. Right? So when it came to digital, standardization was very, very important. And that poses a lot of challenges for us that I'll quickly get into, but great question actually. So today we can, because it's a global standard, we are able to send these DCPs all over the world and they play.
So Hollywood movies are equal.
Yes, absolutely, yes. And you would have seen an increase in Hollywood movies also happening. Now, more than the increase, in many cases, they opened before they opened in Hollywood. Previously, what would happen is that there used to be this, US would play the movies first, and the prints actually literally get cleaned because they would have picked up dust and wear and tear, and then they get shipped to Europe. I believe India window was after Europe. Was it so then or same time?
Yeah, sometimes be after Europe,
right?
But it would always be after
the US, right? But today, in this connected world, imagine there would be a good reason for piracy, right? But yeah.
So there is a lot of hardware I can see for storage and processing. So how much cloud adoption?
Good question. I'll be covering our distribution product, which is cloud-based. I'll cover it in the next. When it comes to the mastering process itself, we are slowly seeing a shift to the cloud. Because remember, I told you that data that we start with is huge. 2.5 terabytes for a movie, or if it's 4K, that's 4 times, so 10 terabytes for a movie. So you have to get all the 10 terabytes into the cloud, and then you have to work with it there, right? So if you're only doing one pass at mastering, the 10 terabytes that the time and expense of the ingress is not going to be worth it. So we saw what happens. We were looking at the mastering process until now. So in the mastering process, security is enforced by physical security, just like how so difficult it is to come to your office, right? So that is physical security, and then they'll have ISO and this process and that process because it's controllable. It's your content. It's your movie. You're a stakeholder in that. You're going to give it the best protection, or it's for a known client. So it starts off, all of the digital cinema package starts off from a trusted environment where there are physical access control that happens, but anything that's coming out of that environment is expected to be encrypted. So DCP, the moment it comes out, it's encrypted. You could put it on a hard drive and you can put it on the street and nobody will be able to do anything with it unless they get a key for it. So that tweet that I showed you earlier, right? The KDM problem. So that is the KDM that I'm talking about. Yeah, but that's a whole different problem though, why they don't get KDMs, but they need the KDM to unlock the movie. So, so again, you're basically seeing the different elements that are getting compressed and they get encrypted, they get packaged, and off they go. Transport can be electronic delivery or literally in a bus or drivers driving around and delivering it. We're changing that with the new service now, but predominantly the delivery of movies is physical today. Because a movie that comes out of that process is about 160 gigabytes. So we take that 2.5 to 10 terabytes of source, digital source master as it's called, we compress it down to 160 to 200 gigabytes, and that fits in a hard drive and that ships out. But there's more electronic delivery that's happening now. And on the theater side, so now because the content owner, the producer, has full control over the mastering environment, so they can keep it however secure they want it to be. They have full control over that. But they have no control on the theater side. So on the theater side, the specification that I told you about the DCI spec requires product manufacturers like us to follow a security standard. It's a security management approach. So what the philosophy of this approach is that we don't enforce content security by managing content, but instead we manage security. So you only our burden is to protect cryptographic keys or cryptographic material basically. So that's the approach that we take. So we'll go into a little bit of detail on that. So what happens in the theater is that the security manager gets that KDM, and then it can enable the encryption, the decryption of picture, subtitles, sound, and they all go through slightly different pipelines. So what's interesting here is this guy called forensic watermark. So somebody was asking about piracy. Do you know that we can take a pirated copy that has gone through multiple WhatsApp sharing and resharing and recompression and be able to say which theater and when it happened? So there's so that's a technology called forensic watermarking, and it's forensic watermarking because it actually it's actually invisible watermarking. You won't see it. If you go to a theater, you're not going to see absolutely anything on the picture because watermarks would be like visible, right? You see invisible watermarks. So we have invisible and inaudible watermarks in both picture and sound. And so we run it back through our recovery algorithm and it will tell us where it happened and when.
Even in cam recorded videos?
Yes.
How do you do the when part?
Because the marking is a combination of the location and the time. The marks that embed in the picture. So we are able to then, so somebody was asking about a camcorder capture, right?
Yeah.
So you capture in a camcorder, the picture that you're getting actually has those marks. Okay, so don't do it at the same time all the time in the same theater. That's how people get into trouble.
Excuse me, I have one question. Is it possible to have I'm just thinking out of mind. Or possible to have technology where only the eyes can see, but a camera cannot record?
We have seen some thwarting mechanisms like the camera sensors, because we spoke of camera sensors earlier, right? They can see, like some camera sensors can see infrared, but our eyes cannot see infrared, so they'll actually shine infrared into people, and I think infrared is harmful for humans actually. So there have been techniques like that have been tried, but that's another startup. So if you look at what happens in the ecosystem, filmmakers, they make they use a mastering system to create DCPs, and distributors are the ones that actually create bookings. When you see bookings here, it's actually talking about theater bookings. Distributors picking the theaters where a movie is going to play, and a content delivery system will actually deliver the DCP, the digital cinema package, and the KDMs, the key delivery message, into the theater, and then it gets ingested into what's called a cinema server, and it plays out of there. Other additional things that you're seeing here are, in addition to being able to send and schedule movies, there's also advertisers that use campaign management systems to schedule ads within the theaters. So that's how you get content into the theater. To get audiences into the theater, you need a seat inventory system that is powering a ticketing system, and audiences also discover movies by using a movie database like Movie Buff.
So advertisements are also queued into the content.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, they are also DCPs. They get paid in the same players. So this is how Qube solves all of those problems. Okay. So the movie database that I spoke about is Movie Buff. We have a ticketing platform called JustInTime, and we have a next gen advertising system that's coming up that's called Qube Slate. Qube Wire is a cloud-based distribution system, and the Qube Master is a mastering system, and the in-cinema servers are called Qube XP. So, just we were talking about the security piece in the theater. This is kind of an important part of that. This is called a media block. So this is the guy that actually does a lot of the work that we were talking about. So all of this work of decryption, decoding, and watermarking, all of that happens in that in this media block, right? And what's
so it actually does the watermark and then collects.
Exactly, yeah.
So that's how you do the time also. You know when it was done.
Oh, correct. Yes. That's how we do it. Yeah, okay. You're thinking where the clock came from, right? Yeah. This guy knows the time.
It's a just-in-time clock in print.
Yeah, that happens. Yeah. So every screening gets a different mark. So the content goes in through the network, the DCP that we are talking about, and you see this thing that actually says Qube on it, but with the fins and all that. There is actually the secure boundary, right? So and it's secure boundary because any tamper that's detected here, if you try to even slightly loosen any of these screws, that is a break. It immediately kills itself. So it's a tamper responsive, tamper evidence system hardware that we have built to do that, and that's a requirement that we have to comply with. So all the work of decrypting and forensic marking happens here, and the data then goes into the projector for projection or into the sound equipment, but they are already watermarked. So you could tap them at that point, or you could use a camcorder to record. They are all going to have watermarks in them. Okay, so this is a pretty complicated piece of hardware and software. Underneath that, this is a very beefy FPGA. For those of you that don't know what an FPGA is, it's a field programmable gateway. It's another ARM processor that actually runs the security manager, running a real-time RTOS. Something like an embedded Linux that actually runs in there. So there's a lot that actually goes in this piece of hardware. It's about this size, and it fits into a projector. So all of the security is into this. So this
all the software you write, is it in C or something?
Yeah. So this one, everything that is running in here would be C and C++. Not all the software. There's yeah, but that's a good question because I hadn't annotated it. So there's a lot of C++ that happens there, but we're also getting a lot of Go into the cinema server space. Okay, but if you look at our Qube Wire, Qube Slate, these are our cloud-based distribution ad scheduling product. They are predominantly Go. They do have some security pieces that do that are implemented in C++. So when we have to get closer to the metal, we use C++. And then we had a time where we used every language in the world, and now we are focusing on, I would say, Go is our largest. And then second would be
React for front-end.
React for front-end, Python for testing.
Why Go instead of Python?
So, Python, we tried it, but the biggest benefit of Go is compile language. So it is really fast. In fact, we were one of our component is still running in Node, but the problem with that is we are not able to utilize all the cores. So the performance is limited. Either we have to come up with running multiple processes or do all kinds of things to squeeze all the power. With the Go and its contents implemented, we are able to utilize all power machine. And it is a compiled language, and it is really easy to enforce the type system and do any static analysis. It is difficult with like the technical language like Node or Python. In fact, we were using C# originally. We were pure Microsoft shop, C++ and C#. This was like way back 10 years back. Then at one point when we started, there's all this cloud product. We were experimented with the Node or then now we settled on Go and React for that.
So in 2000 when we started, right, Linux hadn't been that de facto platform for embedded at that time. So we actually had an initial product on embedded Windows XP and Windows legacy carried on for a while, but now it's all crypto.
Even for the OS, we are using embedded Linux fully developed by us, customized by us.
Okay, so just to give you an idea of the complexity, so this as you saw, it's a complex hardware design, complex software design with a lot of requirements that we have. So we have to first comply with all of the requirements and then build features on top of that. So much like any regulated industry, right? So if you guys, any of you have experience working in healthcare or finance or defense, there are rules that are certifications or compliances that you have to go through, and we have to go through the same one. So we go through that DCI, the organization that I mentioned about, that came up with a specification. They do a certification test, right? And then once we are certified, then it's only then we actually get Hollywood content to our system. Okay, and part of that certification is also FIPS validation, so that is Federal Information Processing Standard. It's a US government standard that is again used by banking and the defense industry. So that's, that testing is where they'll actually try to physically drill holes and try to tap into this box to see if there are any attack vectors that we have left unattended or not mitigated. So that's the kind of testing process that we have to go through, and I mean it's just the compliance part of like building this box, right? Minus like the features and everything that we have to do is about $500,000 investment. Yeah, just to give you an idea of the scale of complexity it is. And this DCI test is about, I don't know how many hundreds of tests, because it's several hundreds of tests. And let's say it's 800 tests, right? And we go through one pass and we fail the 800th test. We have to start all over again. So there's so you can't just go fix that one problem and they won't test it again. Of course, we can understand why, but it's also terribly inconvenient and expensive to. Okay, so I think some fluff stuff. I mean, this media block can actually be synchronized with multiple media blocks. So, which means that we could enable screening at Comic-Con, where they had 4 screens. This one was a very large screen that was lit up by 2 projectors because we needed that much light. And then 3 single projectors that was playing on everything playing in sync, meaning that all of the screens were showing absolutely the same frame at the same time. because there's one sound that is running for the auditorium, and you can't be out of sync. It's a very high profile event. Some of you might know what Comic Con is. We also we also worked on Hobbit, and also did the premiere for this movie. And what was special about this movie was it ran in high frame rate. So what that means is that the rate at which pictures are presented to our screen is called the frame rate, and it's at 24 frames per second for a very long time. This movie did it at 48 frames per second, doubling of that to improve motion mostly, because you would have watched, if you watched in some movies, you actually see what's called a judder effect when they do like a big pan like that, you actually see it go like that. Because that's one of the limitations of the 24 frames per second. So 48 tried to do it, but people actually liked the other 24 frames per second look. So this didn't really, the 48 frames per thing hasn't really caught on, but our media block was one of the advanced media blocks that could do it, so we were able to enable that. Another thing that our media block enabled us to do is actually work on what's called variable frame rates. So not basically just work on a movie that's 24 frames per second, because sometimes you have a very fast action scene that you want a higher frame rate, and then you have a slow dialogue scene, you want to have a lower frame rate. So we did that project with this gentleman here, Jonathan Erland, who actually won a Lifetime Achievement Award, and on the Oscar stage he actually thanked us, or mentioned us for working with him on this project. So it was a very great moment for us a couple of years ago. And some of the questions in terms of stack. So a lot of our products are based on the cloud, and maybe it's not very surprising for you to find out what we use in terms of the AWS services. How we use it might be different, and if you have questions about it, we have architects and engineering managers here that can talk about it. But some of the unusual technologies that we use is one thing called a GStreamer, which basically all our media pipelines. It's where we are taking media and sending them through different processing layers, decoding, decrypting, encryption. All of that we use a framework called GStreamer, and this is actually one of the pipelines that we use, a real pipeline from our product. We also use Intel thread building blocks to eke out every bit of performance that we can get from an Intel processor. So we of course leverage GPU acceleration, but we also try to get every, Siva was talking about maxing out the cores. That's all for us, a good task manager is where it's fully green at 100%, right? So when we run a mastering process, we want to see every core running at 100%. So this is very quickly the cloud distribution product. Filmmakers or a mastering facility does the DCP, and they upload it to the Qube cloud. And the distributor then uses a web interface and selects the theaters where the movie has to go to. And then we use a routing algorithm to figure out the right method to get it to a theater. And the reason is that I mentioned that a lot of the world is still using hard drive delivery. Theaters are just getting connectivity either through satellite or through electronic delivery. And the Qube system actually takes care of that, so the distributor doesn't have to think like, oh, that theater in Singapore can only receive a drive, and this theater in Berlin will need to go electronic. So our algorithm figures it out, and
who's the customer for Qube?
Distributors.
Oh, they are
distributors. Yeah.
They pay for Qube.
Yes.
When distributor come and buy a license from you.
No, you will. The business model is you pay per delivery. So you come to us with a movie and you say, I want to send it to the 200 theaters, and then we'll tell you what the price per theater is going to depend on a variety of things. So a theater in India will have a different pricing than something else.
So you already know database features of each theater and then make the project launch?
Absolutely. Yes, and yeah, that's actually a valuable part of our system actually, that all the close to 200,000 screens in the world are cataloged.
So this serial number and public key.
Yes, so the KDM mechanism actually will only work if we know the exact serial number of the server that we are targeting. So it's not just making an initial catalog, but it's also keeping the catalog up to date, because if the digital cinema server breaks and they change it, we can't send them the key that is targeting their old server, right? So there's also, we've also built a mechanism for them to automatically let us know that something has changed, and so that's a very big part of our infrastructure, both automated and manual.
What would be a competition for?
Dolby is one.
Adobe?
No, Dolby. And there's a company called GDC from Hong Kong. Those would be the top two. Sony is in the business. CineHive. What is that? I'm not familiar with CineHive. CineHive. Obviously not. Okay. So the what we are also doing is we are actually internationally equipping theaters with an appliance so that they can receive content electronically. So we put this box called a wiretap into a theater, and now it becomes part of the Qube network, and if movie distribution has to happen, it just all happens electronically. So that's something that we're actively working on now. Qube is actually working in, actually provides coverage to 136 countries in the world. So please make your movies, and you can use Qube to get your movie to any country in the world pretty much, okay? And just finally, we recently opened the largest screen in South Asia. It's a 100 feet wide screen, but that's just to tell you that it's a very large screen, but it's a premium experience that we've launched in the name of Epic. So what that means is that this is where we actually go in and get involved in every aspect of the theater design to maximize the experience for the audience. Okay, so large screen is just one aspect of it. Sound is the other aspect of it. Seats are the other aspect of it. The projection is the other aspect. So Epic is our what's called a premium large format offering that we just recently launched. Somebody asked about the future of cinema. We feel that the future of cinema largely depends on premium experiences like this, because again, to answer the question about streaming, it's very few people are going to have a 100 feet wide screen in their home, right? Because of the real estate challenges. So that's one. So one is the largeness that you get, but the other aspect of cinema is also the communal experience that you want to go for. Maybe we'll have a couple more minutes to go into that. So this is the theater that is in Sulurpet. It's actually right next to Sriharikota, where ISRO is. So that's the end of the talk here. So we can.
One question.
Yeah.
You said low frame rates for dialogues and high frame rates for action scenes. Are the scenes related to frame rates? Meaning, you said action sequences need probably 48 FPS, and for this one frames per second, and this for slow dialogue scenes it could be 24 FPS. So are these scenes? Is it giving a different impact when the FPS is different for different types of scenes?
Yes, it does. It does provide a different impact because what happens is that maybe I think your question is why not use high frame rate for everything, right?
Yes.
Okay. So there's so frame rate I think is the easiest number that we see in there. But there is also what's called a shutter angle that actually plays into this, and how much motion blur that happens between frames. These are the things that give us that. So when you watch everything in 48 frames per second today, you'll almost, most of the people would say that it looks like TV. Because TV runs at a higher frame rate. TV now runs at a higher frame rate. And what happens if you employ those high frame rates for scenes that don't need it, where it's actually not improving things like motion, then it's just the optimal use. So you make the scenes which absolutely need it, do it. The ones that don't do it, and so you're still retaining that full theatrical cinematic experience.
Is it already in existence, or you're?
No, this is still a research topic. Yeah.
Because in that case, it should also be like a transition between 24 to 48 and 48 to 24. The transition might also have to.
Yeah, and it doesn't have to be 24 and 48. It could be 27, 43, all of those. Yeah.
I have two questions for you. So one is regarding your whole product, Qube Jams. I'm here.
Yeah. Hi.
So one is regarding your Qube Jams. You were saying some product.
Qube Jam. Yeah.
So you were talking about way back in 2000s, and you have built a recommendation system based on music. Now they are building recommendation system with few lines of Python code. So now we're talking about way in early 2000s. What are the sophisticated approach you might have gone through when building that? That is one. Second one is me being a 90s kid. I grew up watching videos from rental video cassettes shops, and now Netflix is here. So now where this journey might go from here? What is the prediction of yours? Like how it would go?
Okay, so to answer your first question, back in 2000, machine learning and such sophisticated approaches were not common. So we were using more of a data warehousing, data mining approach to come up with the recommendations. I think what we are observing in the last number of years is that there's a glut of content, right? There's a lot of content that's available, and it's not necessarily bad because everybody has something to watch now. So I think content availability and choice becomes important, and we feel that it'll also filter into the theatrical space where you want to start somehow controlling or voting for the kind of movies you want to watch in the theater in your neighborhood. So that's so more audience, more crowdsourced programming in cinemas.
Excuse me, related to security, so you are a Qube box, right? So you give the input of the hardware and you say you have an encrypted key, but then only the device only do the invisible watermark, right? But we have to feed it there. If I want to encrypt it with the key, I can do it outside of the system, right? Instead of using your that box which only does the watermarking. I know that I have the hardware and you have provided the keys also. So
the keys are to the security. So the keys are not available to the theater or the operator or any human being. The keys will never leave. The keys are never going to leave us.
Okay.
They'll never ever leave that. So that's why if any tamper is detected and the box just forgets all of those keys.
Okay, so the box is the key.
The box is the one that holds, because we use asymmetric encryption, the box holds the private keys, and those private keys even we can't get it out.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
So how will you feed the key to the box?
The box generates the key pair and gives us the pocket key. So the private key never leaves. And this is actually recently, when we were doing it, it was very new, but now you would have heard about the secure enclave on iOS. And I think it's called Key Store in Android. So they have similar technologies now in phones with actually some of the FIPS compliance and those kinds of things.
Okay.
Yeah, you should never. I think in any security system you can't have a private key leave a non-secure.
At the time of making videos, you will create a key and embed into that files, right? Then only you will send, after that only you are sending the files to this Qube box. Then there should be a connection between that public key and private key, then only you can decrypt the key. So then you need to inform some way that this is the public the private key of that particular file, then only you can decrypt.
That is correct. So what happens is we use symmetric encryption to encrypt the media, right? And then we store all of those keys very securely in a hardware security module, as it's called, which is very similar to a tamper, responsive tamper evident piece of hardware. And remember, my colleague was reminding me about the public certificates of the theaters that we have. Actually, it's the devices in the theaters that we have. So if you say that this movie has to go to this particular theater, we go look up what the theater's screen's public key is, and then we use the public key to re-encrypt all these symmetric keys and send it to the theater. And because we have used that theater's screen's public key, only that unit, because it has the private key, will be able to take it.
Okay, at the time of making the box itself, you are creating some one key for that particular box.
Every box has its unique identity. When you burn it, it actually makes a key pair. And yes. And then we catalog the public keys.
So there is a network of distributors, and you have cinema theaters, and so Qube being the product, what is the install base, and how do other cinemas and theaters who don't have Qube, how do they function?
So in India we have about a 40% market share. 45% market share. So yeah, the 55% use equipment from our competitors, but we all operate on standards, right? So what this produce out of our mastering facility will work with that 55% in India and the rest of the world.
Okay, here actually, so it's regarding performance. So how do you measure the performance and other stuff, like how do you make the infrastructure planning and then the network latency kind of stuff actually for your system actually?
So within theater, there is not too much worry about network latency because everything is a local LAN. But even then, we have to do some special configuration like enabling jumbo packets so that the data rate here is 250 Mbps. So if we need to feed the audio video data to this box which resides inside the projector in 250 Mbps rate, which is if you compare with the 1 Gbps line, it is easily achievable, but due to practical difficulty or the practical situation, we have to tweak the network in such a way that there is no disturbance to the line. But on a cloud, we actually use multiple method of delivery. In a digital delivery, we used to directly pull the content from S3. Now we recently switched to CloudFront, but we are not really caching the content in a Edge node, but we are using the AWS backbone to pull the content quickly. But we are also leveraging a P2P topology, P2P network. So if a content is downloaded to some theater, then theater acts as source of the content to any other nearby theater. So it actually helps in a really large distribution where the number of theater increases, the overall performance of the system increases. So that's how we handle the load.
Yeah.
On the non-technical part of piracy, you have so much detail that a video being recorded in which particular place and which particular location. So still while it's a huge challenge for the industry to solve that particular.
Because you have to understand that we only know what happened. The enforcement has to happen with the support of the local government law enforcement, right? So
is it practically possible to solve it if you have so much detail? Is the lack of enforcement that is very clear, or are there some challenges?
Or the difficulties in enforcement. Like if the piracy is happening in Denmark, then it's maybe difficult, maybe easy, depending on the jurisdiction, right? But I think Satya, you'll be able to comment more on this. The question is, you have good forensic watermarking, why is there still rampant piracy?
How is Tamil workers leasing ahead of
So actually, a lot of the piracy used to happen in the Middle East earlier, where people will shoot off the camcorder because there was less enforcement. As we become more and more secure in the way that releases happen, it shifted actually for a little while to a neighboring country, and then finally it's back to India. because we don't have an anti-camcorder law. I can catch somebody in a theater with a camera pointing at the screen, but unless he has misused it already, there's no law that stops me or that can help me arrest this person. They use the Gundas Act or misuse the Gundas Act for that purpose, but that's not really fair. So now finally the government has put out a draft for anti-camcording law, which means that you are simply not permitted to use a camcorder to capture what's on the screen. Hopefully when that law is, when it becomes law in the next few months, we will
and that would apply to phones
actually
also,
catch
right?
somebody in the theater and say, just because you pointed your camera at the screen and there's a video on your phone or on your camera, you are guilty already.
So
Most other countries have
apply
it.
to smartphones also.
Yeah, it will. The anti-camcording law means without the permission of the IP copyright owner, if you point at the screen and capture sound, picture or sound, you are guilty.
What is screen censor? Will it be applicable if I shoot something off my video screen in YouTube? Will it still be applicable, or is it only
No,
movie
this is a
screens?
data anti-camcording law. If you do it at home, this wouldn't apply. Because by then it's easy to copy anyway, right? What really matters is being unable to copy it when the movie has its large release. That's where it's most important.
And just as a contrast point, in the US, this law is very much in effect. There are stories of somebody that was having a birthday party in a neighboring auditorium, and she just walked around with the camcorder she was using to record the birthday party into a actual live show, and she got arrested. So there they very this law is in effect, and maybe that's helping curb piracy.
Almost all countries now around the world have done this anti-camcording law. Because there's no technical way we know of yet to prevent that capture.
So instead of trying to address the input side of things, right, is there anything that people are working, like now that considering you can actually watermark a sound or a file, is there any integration in hardware where it can, like you can also watermark like a code that can be a negative code that can go into any hardware device, right, like your phone or your computer or anything. That's where people are realizing this content. If that negative code is there, can that hardware detect it and
not record it?
Yeah. Because you can actually push that script through that watermark now.
It's an industry standard.
Yeah, if all the laptops and
Somewhat like it will fall into the DRM.
Yeah.
DRM area.
Imagine how hard it will be for any company to do that. Right? I mean, technically, yes, they could certainly do that.
Right? In all devices, because it could not just be about movies, but it could be any content, right? Whether it's pornography, whatever, right?
Somebody is going to always make a device that will not that's the problem. Right?
No, it can be anti-democratic as well. The government can decide to switch off all cameras when they don't want you to shoot.
Right. It's way too much power.
Okay, so I had.
Yes.
So your device is in certain few theaters. You don't have 100% market share for your device, and you also send to the distributors who master their movies. So you have these two are not related in the sense that it could get out of the device business completely, right? Yes, your mastering could.
Yeah, our Qube, our distribution business is completely agnostic to where the DCPs came from and where it's going.
Right.
Like we don't care who mastered it or who's going to play it because it's all standardized.
Okay, so which one of these two businesses is more important for you or friends?
Well, it's, obviously the content business because there is a finite number of theaters and there's content is your content happens all the time. Like blanking on the word. There's infinite amount of content in theory, but on the product side also, in terms of providing hardware and software, there's 200,000 is a large number in the sense that even at a certain rate of replacement that happens every year, there are substantial business to be had. Because these are not cheap equipment, right? These are $10,000 per.
But 45% of market share, I would consider is a leadership in any market segment. Right?
Yeah, that is in India.
The second question I had is you have the FPGA, so you made it yourself or all these hardware parts assembled out of?
Well, there are contract manufacturing companies that do the hardware assembly. So we don't build the board ourselves, but the hardware design and the hardware implementation all happen.
In terms of the hardware, in terms of OS update or firmware update, how do you release it to the systems? And you have regular builds or it's time tested and every time you need to build it? How do you do that?
Let's answer that. I think his question is on the server. Right? On the product in the theaters.
Okay, so the large number of group in our company that Rajesh mentioned, there are 1,000 people. Those are people who are stationed around the world, and they take care of maintaining these servers or data equipment. So part of their job is whenever we push a new build, they will go and update it on each and every data. Unlike in a cloud-based environment, this is not easy. I mean, you cannot have a very fast release cycle. All our releases are planned in such a way that we group features and we don't do a frequent release. Even the release that we make, we roll out in the selected theaters, we observe it, we make sure there are no issues, then we slowly expand, and after some certain confidence we deploy, we'll give instruction to the support team to roll out everything. But these days,
I just want to add that we are a product under certification, and what that means is that after a certain number of updates, I think it's 3 updates, we have to go back for recertification. That's time and cost. It's like getting an app store approval, except it's more time and more money.
So if you look at the server, there are 2 portions. One is the core part that Rajesh mentioned, the whole, where we limited the functionality implementation to absolute minimum, because that is the area that needs to be certified. It has all this restriction. So there is another portion, the server portion, where we have implemented all the business functions. That is easy to update, doesn't come under the compliance. So that we update to release frequently.
I have a business question.
Yes, go ahead.
So they would have got a lot of offer for acquisition. How did they resist it for these many years and build a global force like this? This is a very genuine question.
In the middle stages of the business, we have a long way to go in what we are.
It's a very serious question. So if you could kindly elaborate on it, I'm sure you would have got a lot of offers.
Yeah, we have funding from Nomura, Intel, and Cisco. So yes, they would like to exit someday with a decent return.
When was the last IPO?
It's been 7 or 8 years.
So is it still a private limited company or plans to go for IPO?
Not in the near future.
What percentage of the global market do you hold, Sadhu?
No, we have products that cover so many segments.
Okay.
So like the
different
segment, I guess now we see about 15 or 20% of the market. But we have a long way to go in each of these, and let's if we are number 1 or number 2 in every segment, that's maybe the right time to grow into
all the very best. All the very best.
Yeah, I have a
We
question.
want to see a Chennai company.
Rajesh, I have a question. How about 3D movies? I see that's an excellent way to reduce the piracy. Why can't all movies put up 3D? I mean, I know there are distribution challenges to the end viewers in our city.
It's actually not that easy, difficult to pirate the 3D movie. You just use one of the filters and show through that. So you did a 2D capture.
Oh, okay. Is it so simple? Okay. I will save some time.
Just because one eye it's 2D, right? So.
But is it not true that all the Disney movies come with, especially kids movies, come with 3D? And
3D, yeah.
Piracy is almost eliminated. Is that a lie? Piracy is significant.
I don't know if there's a correlation between 3D and piracy. I mean, it's if the kids are expecting to watch the 3D at home, yes, then this would be a deterrent, right? But the people that are going in for the piracy, they'll take anything they can. So
we have a person watching 144 So that kind of people, you cannot do anything.
I think the moment you are accepting of piracy, your quality, your bar has gone way down, right? So yes, so that's a good point. really depends on the experience that we have to go into the theater. If it's a differentiated experience, it's an experience that you can't get at home, people will continue going to the theater. 3D in the theater is an experience like that for kids.
No, I was at least assuming 3D is nowadays more for restricting piracy, and I don't think I'm visually inclined to see 3D movies. It's just a nonsense to put a glass and see it. Thanks.
Just can you talk about yourself? Just,
I have fans in the room.
I think we'll wind up with the last two questions.
Okay.
Yeah, last two questions. Anyone? Yeah.
So for streaming services like streaming only services like Amazon Prime and Netflix, so does the content which is only streaming also have to go through mastering process and distribution?
Yes, I think on their Amazon and Netflix are vastly sophisticated workflows also like we do because they do like 30 languages, and they also do adaptive rate encoding so that if your quality drops, you're getting something. So they do all of that, but they also do theatrical releases. In fact, Netflix, every show that they, for example, launch in India, they use CubeWire to screen in theaters for like premiere shows, Red Cup, like press shows and stuff like that. So they also do DCPs, but yes, they also a lot of their mastering processes are very automated because the sheer amount of content that they do.
I think I have one last question. Yeah?
So what is the video format that is used defined in the projector? Is it the same video format, or again they're getting transported to the standard video format, or
No, it goes back to the format that we started with.
Original format.
We call it DCDM Prime. It's a visually lossless equivalent of what it originally started off as.
So it's lost its place.
I think we can take it offline. We're going to be around, I think.
Yeah.
They will wrap up here.
I think you can have the last question.
Yes.
Okay.
Okay, so the question is, Cube has a limited presence, right? So within limited theaters. Now the movie maker will have to show it on multiple theaters, right? So who is your real customer? Is it the distributors or movie makers or the theaters who purchase the CubeWire from you and then ask the distributors to?
Theaters are customers to buy, as you mentioned, CubeWire. They subscribe to CubeWire, or they also buy digital cinema servers and media blocks. Distributors are customers to make the DCPs and send them around the world. And as I mentioned, all of these are, because they are based on standards, we can send to any Cube theater or non-Cube theater in the world. And if they buy a Cube, they can play DCPs that was made by Cube or made by anybody else, because we have an industry standard that we work.
So you can distribute for non-Cube theaters also?
Absolutely, yes.
Yeah, how was the security before the Cube boxes? How was the security before the Cube boxes?
Before was film. Film has no security.
Thank you, Rajesh, for your awesome presentation,
Thank you.
and thank you for everyone.